The cabin sat alone against the desert like a forgotten prayer, weathered wood silvered by countless sunrises. For 3 years Thomas Whitmore had called this solitude home, speaking only to his horse and the wind that carried memories he tried to bury. The silence had become his companion, his punishment, his shield against a world that had taken everything he loved, until the morning 10. Apache warriors appeared at his door. Thomas had been mending a bridle when he saw them shadows, moving across the scrubland with the fluid grace of water finding its course. His heart hammered against his ribs as he set down his work, muscle memory reaching for the rifle that hadn't fired in anger for 3 long years. But something in their approach stayed his hand. They came without war paint, without the fierce cries that had once haunted his dreams. They came with purpose, but not violence. The leader, a man with silver threading his black braids and scars mapping stories across his weathered face, raised his hand in greeting. Thomas recognized him immediately. Running Bear, war chief of the Chiricahua, a man whose name had been whispered in fear around campfires from Tucson to El Paso. Yet here he stood, empty-handed save for a worn leather pouch clutched against his chest. Thomas Whitmore, Running Bear, spoke in careful English, each word weighted with meaning. "We have traveled for days to find you." Thomas stepped onto his porch, his bare feet feeling every splinter in the sun-warmed wood. "You found me." His voice came out rusty from disuse, like an old gate finally opened. "What do you want?" Running Bear's dark eyes held depths Thomas couldn't fathom. "We come to speak of Mountain Flower." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. 3 years of careful numbness cracked open, and suddenly he was drowning in memories. He'd fought so hard to suppress Mountain Flower Land, the Apache woman who had been his world, his salvation, his greatest love and deepest regret. The woman he'd lost to his own cowardice and the cruel prejudices of a world that couldn't accept their love. "She's dead," Thomas said flatly, the words tasting like ash. "It's been dead 3 years. "No," Running Bear replied, and that single word carried the force of an earthquake. "She lives. She carries your child." The world tilted beneath Thomas's feet. He gripped the porch railing until his knuckles went white, splinters biting into his palms. A child, their child. The impossible dream they'd whispered about in stolen moments under desert stars, believing their love could overcome any obstacle. "You're lying," Thomas whispered. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't true. Running Bear's face held no deception, only the terrible weight of truth. "She lives," Running Bear repeated, "but not for long." The story spilled out in the shade of Thomas's ramada, shared over water, drawn from his well, and the kind of silence that exists between men who have known loss. Elena Mountain Flower had survived the massacre that Thomas thought had claimed her life. She'd been injured, left for dead among the burning wickiups. But her people had found her. They'd nursed her back to health in the hidden places of the mountains, far from the cavalry patrols and the vengeance that followed in their wake. For 3 years, she'd lived with the knowledge that Thomas believed her dead. For 3 years, she'd raised their daughter a child with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. "The sickness came with the last moon," Running Bear explained, his weathered hands tracing patterns in the dust. "She burns with fever that will not break. The medicine men have tried everything. She calls your name in her dreams." Thomas closed his eyes, remembering Elena as she'd been vibrant and fierce, with laughter that could chase away the darkest thoughts. She'd been collecting wild honey the first time he'd seen her. Her buckskin dress golden in the afternoon light, her hair flowing like black water down her back. He'd been tracking rustlers then, a bounty hunter who'd grown tired of killing but didn't know any other way to live. She'd saved his life that day, warning him of the ambush waiting ahead. By evening, she'd saved his soul. Their love had been impossible from the start. Thomas, a white man carrying the weight of too many graves and too many regrets. Lena, daughter of a war chief, bound by traditions as old as the mountains themselves. But love, they'd discovered, followed no laws but its own. For 2 years, it'd stolen moments together, meeting in hidden canyons and desert springs, building a world that existed only in whispers and touch. Thomas had learned her language. her customs, her dreams of peace between their peoples. Alina had taught him to see the sacred in ordinary things, to find silence that healed instead of haunted. They'd planned to run away together, to find some distant place where their love wouldn't be a betrayal to both their worlds. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The cavalry had come in winter, following rumors of Apache raiders. Thomas had been in town, selling pelts and buying supplies for their planned escape. He'd returned to find the village in flames, the bodies of Elena's people scattered like broken dolls across the snow. He'd searched through the carnage for hours, calling her name until his voice gave out. But he'd never found her body. He'd assumed that meant she'd died in the flames. Now, 3 years later, the truth sat before him like a judgment. She'd lived. She'd borne his child, while he'd been hiding in his self-imposed exile. Nursing his grief like a familiar wound, she'd been waiting for him to find her. "Where is she?" Thomas asked, already knowing he would follow these warriors anywhere they led. "3 days north," Running Bear replied, "in the sacred caves where the spirits dance, but the path is dangerous. Soldiers patrol the valleys, and our enemies grow bold." Thomas thought of Elena dying alone, calling his name in fevered dreams. He thought of a daughter he'd never met, a child who might soon lose the only parent she'd ever known. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll need an hour to pack," he said. Running Bear nodded. "We leave with the sun." That night, as the Apache warriors made their camp in the desert beyond his cabin, Thomas sat on his porch and remembered. He remembered Elena's hands, graceful and sure as they worked beadwork by firelight. He remembered her laugh, bright as silver bells in the mountain air. He remembered the way she'd looked at him the last time they'd been together, her eyes full of love and hope and plans for their future. He'd failed her once by not being there when she needed him most. He wouldn't fail her again. The journey north took them through country that existed on no map, following deer trails and ancient paths known only to Elena's people. Thomas rode his bay gelding while the Apache warriors moved on foot, their moccasined feet finding purchase on rocks that would have sent his horse tumbling into the canyon below. They traveled mostly in silence. But gradually, Thomas began to piece together the story of the years he'd lost. Elena had recovered from her wounds, but the attack had scattered her band. Many had fled to Mexico. Others had joined reservation life, but a small group had chosen the old ways, living hidden in the mountains like ghosts from another time. Elena had become a bridge between the old world and the new, translating for government agents teaching children the stories that kept their culture alive. She'd never married, never taken another man, though Running Bear spoke of many who had sought her hand. She said her heart belonged to the white man who taught her to sing songs in his language. Running Bear explained as they made camp the second night, "She taught your daughter those songs." Daughter. The concept still felt impossible, wonderful, terrifying. Thomas had convinced himself he was meant to be alone, that his past made him unfit for love or family. But Elena had seen something different in him, something worth saving. On the third day, they climbed into country that seemed touched by magic. Red rock spires reached toward endless sky, and hidden springs fed gardens of wildflowers that bloomed in impossible colors. This was sacred land, Thomas realized, a place where the spirit world pressed close to the earth. The caves appeared suddenly, openings in the cliff face that seemed to watch their approach with dark, knowing eyes. Smoke rose from hidden fires, and Thomas caught the scent of cooking meat and medicinal herbs. People moved in the shadows, women with worry-lined faces, children who stared at him with curious eyes, old men who nodded gravely at Running Bears. Return, and then he saw her. Elena sat propped against a stone wall near one of the cave mouths, wrapped in blankets that couldn't hide how thin she'd become. Her once lustrous hair hung limp around a face drawn tight with fever, but her eyes, those deep, dark eyes that had captured his heart, still held all the warmth he remembered. Beside her sat a little girl of perhaps 3 summers.
That's with Thomas's?
Green eyes set in Elena's delicate features. The child looked up as the warriors approached, and Thomas felt his heart stop as she smiled Elena's smile, bright and trusting and full of joy. "Papa," the little girl said in perfect English. And Thomas understood that Alina had kept his memory alive in their daughter's heart. He dismounted slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. Alina's eyes never left his face as he approached, and he saw wonder there, and relief, and a love that 3 years of separation couldn't diminish. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly over her fevered face. "I thought you were dead. God help." "Me, Alina, I thought I'd lost you." She smiled, the same smile that had lit his world 2 winters ago. "I knew you would come. I told Little Star her papa would come when she needed him most." Little Star, their daughter, pressed close against Elena's side, studying Thomas with the fearless curiosity of the very young. "Mama says you're brave like the mountain cats," she announced solemnly. "Are you really my papa?" Thomas felt tears he'd held back for 3 years finally fall. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your papa, and I'm never leaving you again." But even as he spoke the words, he could see how ill Alina was. Her skin burned with fever. Her breathing was shallow and labored. And there was a fragility to her that spoke of a body pushed beyond endurance. The tribe's medicine man, an ancient Apache with eyes like winter sky, drew Thomas aside. "The sickness is deep," he said in careful English. "It eats at her spirit as much as her body. She has held on only for this, to see you once more, to know the child will not be alone." "There has to be something," Thomas said desperately. "Some treatment? Some medicine?" The old man shook his head sadly. "I have tried everything the spirits have taught me. Perhaps love is the only medicine left." That night, Thomas sat vigil beside Alina, while Little Star slept between them, one small hand curled in his rough palm. Alina drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and aware, sometimes lost in fevered dreams that took her far away. In her clearer moments, they talked. She told him about their daughter's first steps, first words, the way she collected pretty stones and sang the lullabies Alina had taught her. Thomas told her about the 3 years of silence, the guilt that had eaten at him, the way he'd lost himself in grief. "I should have looked harder," he said, stroking her fever-damped hair. "Should have known you survived. Should have found you." "You're here now," Alina whispered. "That's all that matters. Promise me, Thomas. Promise you'll take care of her. Teach her about both worlds, yours and mine." "Don't talk like that," Thomas said fiercely. "You're going to get better. We're going to raise her together, like we planned." But even as he spoke, he could feel Alina slipping away from him, her spirit growing lighter as her body grew weaker. Dawn found them still talking, Alina's voice growing fainter as the sky brightened. Beyond the cave mouth, Little Star woke to find her parents watching the sunrise together. She crawled into Thomas's lap with the easy trust of a child who had never known abandonment. "Tell me about the ocean," Alina whispered, remembering the stories Thomas had shared about his boyhood on the California coast. "Tell me about the waves." So Thomas spoke of salt air and endless water, of waves that rolled in like white horses, and tide pools full of treasures. He told her about the house he'd dreamed of building there, with windows facing the sea and a garden where a Little Star could play. As he spoke, Alina smiled, her eyes fixed on something beyond the cave wall. "It sounds beautiful," she said. "Promise me you'll take her there, show her the ocean." "Promise," Thomas said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Alina's breathing grew shallow as the morning wore on. The women of the tribe came too. Sit with them, adding their voices to the vigil, singing ancient songs that spoke of journeys to the spirit world. Little Stars seemed to understand what was happening with the wisdom children sometimes possess. Staying close to her mother, but not afraid. Near midday, the desert sun blazing high overhead, Alina opened her eyes one last time, her gaze found Thomas's face, and she smiled with the same radiant joy he remembered from their first meeting. "Love her for both of us," she whispered. "Always," Thomas promised. Alina's eyes closed, and with a sigh as soft as desert wind, she let go. The Apache buried their dead in the old way, in hidden places known only to the spirits and the stones. Thomas helped carry Alina to her resting place high on the canyon wall, where she could watch over the sacred land she'd loved. Little Star placed wildflowers on the grave and sang a song Alina had taught her, her young voice clear and true. In the desert silence, Running Bear approached Thomas as the ceremony concluded. "The child is welcome among us," he said quietly. "She is our blood as much as yours." Thomas looked down at little Star, who had slipped her small hand into his. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she stood straight and proud like her mother had taught her. "Thank you," Thomas said to Running Bear. "But Alina made me promise to show her both worlds, I think. I think it's time I stopped running for mine." The goodbyes were difficult, but not final. Running Bear and his people would always be family. To Little Star, and Thomas promised to bring her back to visit, to learn the stories and traditions that were her birthright. But for now, they would travel west, toward the ocean Alina had dreamed of seeing. They made an odd pair riding out of the sacred canyons, a weathered white man and a half Apache child, bound together by love and loss and hope for something better. Little Star rode in front of Thomas on his gentle bay, chattering about everything she saw, her natural curiosity gradually overcoming her grief. "Papa," she said, as they paused to water the horse at a desert spring, "Mama said you used to be sad all the time before you met her. Are you going to be sad again now that she's gone?" Thomas considered the question seriously, watching his daughter's reflection in the clear water. "I'll miss your mama every day for the rest of my life," he said finally. "But I'm not going to be that kind of sad anymore, because she gave me the most precious gift in the world, you." Little Star nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Will you teach me to swim in the ocean like you promised, Mama?" "I'll teach you everything," Thomas said, lifting her onto the horse. "Swimming and fishing and reading and writing. And you'll teach me the songs your mama sang, and the stories Running Bear told, and how to braid your hair the way she did." They rode west through desert and mountain, following the old California trail toward the coast. Some nights they camped, under stars that seemed close enough to touch. And Thomas would tell Little Star stories about her mother, how brave she'd been, how kind, how her laughter could make flowers bloom in the desert. Other nights they stayed in frontier towns, where Thomas worked odd jobs to earn traveling money, and Little Star charmed everyone she met with her bright smile and fearless spirit. Slowly, day by day, they began to heal each other. Thomas's silence broke open like a dam in spring flood, releasing years of pent-up words and feelings. Little Star's grief transformed into celebration of the mother she'd loved. Keeping Elena's memory alive through stories and songs and the Apache words she taught her father, they reached the Pacific on a morning when the sky was painted in shades of pearl and gold. Thomas lifted Little Star onto his shoulders as they crested the final hill, and together they looked out at the endless water that stretched to the horizon. "It's bigger than the whole world," Little Star breathed, her small hands gripping Thomas's hair. "That's what your mama said when I first described it to her," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. They spent their first day at the ocean's edge, Little Star splashing in the shallows, while Thomas looked for the perfect spot to build their new life. He found it on a bluff overlooking a protected cove, where wildflowers grew in the salt air, and the sound of waves would be a constant lullaby. The house took most of the summer to build, but it was worth every splinter and sore muscle. Thomas had help from neighbors who had heard their story and been moved by Ida, a widowed schoolteacher who offered to help educate Little Star, a retired sea captain who taught them both to sail, a Mexican family who shared their knowledge of growing things in sandy soil. By autumn, they had a home that was everything Thomas had dreamed of, and more. Just as he'd promised Alina, a garden bloomed behind the house where Little Star could play and grow. And on clear evenings, he would sit on the porch and watch the sun sink into the Pacific while Little Star practiced the songs her mother had taught her. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were times when prejudice raised its ugly head, when people whispered about the white man and his half-breed daughter. But Thomas had learned something from Alina about facing the world with dignity and grace. And Little Star had inherited both her parents' strength. She grew into a remarkable young woman, fluent in Apache, Spanish, and English, equally at home in the water and the mountains. She corresponded with Running Bear and his people, keeping her connection to her mother's heritage strong. And she never forgot the promise her father had made to Alina in that desert cave. On little Star's 18th birthday, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the ocean in brilliant colors, she turned to Thomas with Elena's smile lighting her face. "Papa," she said, "I think Mama would be proud of the life we built." Thomas looked at his daughter no longer little, but always his star, and felt a peace he'd never thought possible. Elena lived on in their daughter's laughter, in the songs she sang, in the way she saw beauty in the world around her. The love they'd shared had not ended with Elena's death. It had transformed, growing stronger through the years they'd spent. Honoring her memory, "I know she would be," Thomas said, pulling little Star close. In the distance, waves rolled in like white horses, carrying whispers of forever on the salt sweet air.